wonder, because I think I haven't dabbled enough into that, but you're talking about niche markets. The Xserve, I know, serves for a lot of these editing houses and these movie studios that.
No, and that's one of the niche markets. Like if
Linux is prevalent there. Linux is used for custom renderers, and they have to communicate with each other. So I know there's got to be some collaboration between Xserves and Linux server farms.
Well, it's more to do with, like, I'll give you an example of something that would be using that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Blackmagic stuff. They do video cards and audio editing and good editing suites like that. They're more the hardware side. Because OS X is better known, they built their stuff to run on OS X. There's no reason they couldn't build it to run on Linux, except the average end consumer, unless they're a geek, wouldn't realize that that's the case. But they took advantage of Linux considerably there, and that they built their system to, it's like the primary server or node is an OS X machine. But its scalability, where you're adding racks of GPUs and everything else to it, is a Linux farm. And the only reason that primary node isn't a Linux machine is because they haven't invested the time and energy in that yet. Somewhere down the road, it wouldn't surprise me if they put in the effort into that, but Linux is going to have to be more well-known end user for them to invest the development costs in that.
Sure.
And all these niche things, that's how it goes. And in that particular case, you're not putting an OS X server there. You're putting something like a Mac Pro. You're putting consumer OS X because there's no reason to buy the OS X server, which is it's a different thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. It's a market that it's trying to fill that it doesn't really fit in. And that's why I'm not saying it's a bad product, but it's one of those, it's a real mix-mash as to whether or not.
It's hard to compete against Linux. I mean, they're the masters of much of the server world, and more power to them for that.
And this is part of why I think Apple, you disagree with me. You think they're just not investing in doing any Linux investment or opening any of the hooks they need to for Linux just because they don't see the need because Linux is small. I think it's more they don't want the.
I think that they don't have the resources to do it yet. I mean,
and I agree that they might not be. They don't have the resources, but because of the way the Linux community works, if they would just create some open hooks, they don't even have to be open source. They just have to open up the hooks to allow Linux to tie into their system.
Sure.
And Linux would do all the work for them without Apple having to lift a finger.
Like that might happen. I mean, I know Apple's not going to dab in anything GPL licensed, but certainly allowing hooks in, I can see them doing it. I know Shake runs on Linux, and they have to have collaboration with Linux server farms.
Yeah.
I don't see animation render houses get away with. It's not an all OS X in-house.
No.
They're using app systems, and I know that they have proprietary render farms that are all Linux-based. That they have to collaborate somehow.
Well, no, and that's the thing. This is my opinion. I have no facts to support this, but I just feel like because of the way the server backend market, like we were just talking about, goes, that Apple is in some ways going out of their way to ignore Linux and pretend Linux doesn't exist and prevent knowledge of Linux in the end user market, because if Linux becomes as well known in the end user market as it is in the server side and the stuff we're talking about, it makes it incredibly hard. And on the one hand, it's perfect. It's good. It's a smart business, because if this ever turns into it, right now, it's the mentality is Mac versus Windows. And even though it's Apple versus everyone else, the average end user sees it as Mac versus Windows. I can't count how many times I've had to say Mac equals OS X plus Windows. PC equals Linux plus Windows. And I can't count how many times I've had to say that. And Apple is deathly afraid of that becoming the common mentality, because when that becomes the common mentality, it's Linux versus Unix, not Unix versus Windows. And that's going to be really hard for Apple to justify their current business model against.
Yeah, but Apple, I believe Jobs when he says it's no longer because I won't go that far, but it's personal blood with Windows. It's just been that way, and I would love for a Windows-dominated desktop to go away, and more power to Linux if they could fill that void, even versus Apple not being able to do it. And that I don't ever see the war that is Apple versus Microsoft ever culminating with Linux versus Apple. And Apple's always going to have its demographic, and the thing that and I understand it. It's not individual properties or nodes that we buy like OS 10 and things. It's, let's say, why can't I buy? Why does it always have to go through iTunes? Like we were discussing before.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have other marketplaces be allowed to come in, and let's allow these other third-party guys to come in. It's the ecosystem bubble that is the lockdown, but not
which is why I refuse.
Hardware. But go ahead.
It's why I refuse to get in. It's why I refuse the Apple ecosystem. I don't want to be locked into that bubble, because I have seen firsthand how when there's a plethora of choices, everything gets better. Competition is good, not bad. It's
right. And it is hard. It is harder to.
Well, the problem is once there's competition, you can't sit on your ass.
Yeah. So I can see that. I can see that point of it, especially when you get into this realm that we're discussing. Definitely. But I don't ever see the war that is Apple versus Microsoft, even though diplomatically they like to say that it doesn't exist, but clearly the Mac versus PC ads.
Well, they've killed those now. Well, I honestly, in a roundabout way, I kind of got to thank the Mac versus PC ads, because indirectly they're responsible for a new level of Linux awareness.
Hey, it's great. I just don't see. It ever culminating to that. And usually the Apple fan argument to Linux is just like it's just not intuitive enough for them.
The other argument for them, aside from that, is they say, "Oh, it's just copying OS 10." It's the fan. Oh, I've heard that. The fanboy argument is always everybody's copying OS 10. OS 10 did it. It's not. And I bite my tongue, and I bite my tongue, and I swear, because every time I hear a fanboy go, "Linux is copying OS 10," I'm like, let me name the following open source projects that OS 10 has incorporated and copied.
I want you to send me a PM for the next time you hear that. Because if I were to hear that, I'd go ape shit, man. I actually have never heard that from the Apple, and I chum around with some pretty hardcore Apple fans that I've never heard that argument that OS 10 or Linux copied OS 10 or any. I mean, It's always been that it's not intuitive enough. They like it, but they wish it.
They talk about things like Ubuntu is because you used to have to add the equivalent to the Linux equivalent to the dock to Ubuntu and other things like that, and now that things like that are being included by default for sure usability, and it's an open source implementation of that. It's not a clone of the Apple stuff, and in some ways I think it's superior if you like that, because it does some things that OS 10 still won't let you do with the dock, because it's entirely open source nature. It's like their logic is the end user should be in charge of this thing, not the OS.
Customizability is absent on Apple. Unless you write an application to do it.
Right, and it's like their mentality that thing that's been in development for over a decade, which means in some ways it's actually older than OS 10. is, oh, well, see, doesn't that look a lot like OS 10? Aren't they copying OS 10?
Can't believe wow.
But yeah, it's like I swear they're not going to be happy. Well, it's like there are a lot of similarities between OS 10 and Linux, just like there are similarities between Linux and Unix. But they're not copying each other. They're doing what makes sense in usability.
Basically, Linux had a good idea. They said, look, we're just going to make a Unix-like system because the licensing
sucks.
Yeah, but then of course the FreeBSD, the Berkeley distribution went that route too and said, well, you know what, we're going to have some of the native Bell Labs Unix code, but we're also going to have our licensing and make it for the world. And then essentially that's what Solaris eventually took a hold of. The System 10, what was it? Solaris System 10 took, what was it? What did Unix leave off that? What was it called? System 4? System 5?
I forget. It's been a while.
and you branched off of it, and you had parallel worlds. I always tell people, stop saying Linux is Unix and Unix is Linux, because I find it insulting to say.
When I talk about this, I say Unix-like systems because they're different. They have similar architectures and similar benefits, but they're not identical. Yes. They're not the same thing.
Well, no, but the reason why I say it is for a different reason. In that it took a lot of energy, resources, and brilliant ideas to start from scratch and build Linux. Or the foundation, the foundation kernel, and go from it. I like to give credit where credit is due. If you build them in parallel and make it as powerful as it is today, you have all my respect. End of story. And I can't stand when people say, well, this has been copied from here. Bull crap. They saw a system that they liked. They understood the ideal principles behind that, and they said, you know what? We like that, but we're going to do something like that over here, and we're going to start it from the ground up and look at where it is today. And that's why I think it's insulting to all the people that spent a lot of their blood and sweat and late nights and opportunity costs in life just to have where Linux is and all of its underpinnings where it is today. And so I try to make sure that people understand and say, respect Unix for what it is, respect the Berkeley distribution for what it is, and understand and respect Linux for where it is and what it is. Mm-hmm. Leave it at that.
Well, no, it's like, and they all have their place.
Yeah.